Well, Briahna, I'm dying to know what's on your radar.
Well, Robbie, something good finally happened. Now look, bare minimum Biden didn't live up to his campaign promises. He failed to cancel all student debt for public school graduates making less than $125,000 a year like he promised. He failed to cancel all student debt for HBCU graduates under that same income threshold. But yesterday, he did announce a plan to cancel $10,000 of debt for all student debtors earning under $125,000 a year, as well as $20,000 for recipients of Pell Grants. Pell Grants, of course, are federal grants awarded only to undergraduate students who display exceptional financial need. And I gotta say, I have a lot of complaints about Biden, but this, from a press conference yesterday, was pretty based.
Mr. President, is this unfair to people who paid their student loans or chose not to take out loans?
Is it fair to people who, in fact, do not own multi-billion-dollar businesses to see why these guys give them all a tax breaks? Is that fair? What do you think?
What about people who paid their loans, though, struggle to pay their loans, and now others don't have to?
Biden's right. The logic articulated by those reporters that someone helping out some people is unfair because other people exist is so anti-solidaristic, so anti-worker, so anti-community that it deserves the scorn that Biden served up. Should childless people pay for those with children? Should people who don't have special needs pay for families with kids who do need more support? Should non-drivers pay for roads? Should people without homes support all the mortgage subsidies that have been pitched to good, wholesome, middle-class Americans for years? Truly, what is the difference there? Well, we'll get back to that difference later in this radar, but first, let's review the public reaction to this policy, shall we? Now again, Biden literally did less than what he campaigned on, and elites who desperately want American workers to be deeply indebted, to have no social mobility, no ability to start their own businesses and get out from under the thumbs of Wall Street control, still wet their collective pamper. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy tweeted, "Who will be forced to pay for Biden's debt transfer scam? Hardworking Americans who already paid off their debts or never took on student loan debt in the first place." Well, I can't reply better than podcaster Brian Tyler, who replied, "Your party added $2 trillion to the debt to give permanent tax handouts to billionaires and major corporations. And you're mad that President Biden is taking some action to help relieve a generation of working Americans from mountains of debt?" South Carolina Senator Tim Scott tweeted, "President Biden's plan to cancel student debt is no compassionate freebie for Americans. It's a $300 billion economic burden placed on lower and middle class families in the midst of a recession." $300 billion? That's nothing compared to the $700 billion in PPP loans that were forgiven, the overwhelming majority of which went to millionaires or billionaires like Paul Pelosi, Khloe Kardashian, and Jared Kushner, the subject of my radar yesterday. Mitt Romney, famous for being so rich that he has an elevator for his cars, Mitt Romney, who founded Bain Capital, an investment firm that staged an epic wealth grab, destroyed jobs, and stuck others with the bill, he had the audacity to tweet, "Sad to see what's being done to bribe the voters. Biden's student loan forgiveness plan may win Democrats some votes, but it fuels inflation, foots taxpayers with other people's financial obligations, is unfair to those who paid their own way, and creates irresponsible expectations." Bribe? Now it's a bribe to do something to help the middle class, the lower 60% of earners who will benefit from this policy, as we discussed on the show yesterday with Sparky Abraham. It seems that conservatives want to divide Americans up into makers and takers, not to reward the middle-class makers who did the quote-unquote right thing and went to college, but to excuse their choice to do nothing for anybody. And Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, literally tweeted, "From a yacht in Italy." Democrats' push to forgive student loans won't solve the problem. We need real solutions that don't create an added burden on taxpayers. My College Act will actually hold universities accountable for student outcomes and force them to answer for skyrocketing tuition costs. Scott, of course, famously got 100% of the purchase price of super yachts written off as a bonus depreciation in the 2017 tax bill. Julian Castro's communication strategist summarized Scott's out-of-touch sentiment beautifully, tweeting, "Pay off your own debt," says a generation of pundits that went to school when classes were $100 and the minimum wage could finance a mortgage on a two-bedroom home. And he's right. College costs have skyrocketed exponentially over the last 30 years. But I will give at least Rick Scott some credit for acknowledging the student debt crisis is real and for offering something in the way of a policy solution. But his plan is a Band-Aid that does nothing to expand on what should be the goal here, what progressives and conservative populists alike should be using this movement to springboard to, and that's free public college. Look, as I've said before, people who point out that student debt cancellation is a short-term solution that doesn't get at the root of the problem are absolutely right. That's why I have been a longtime advocate of Bernie Sanders' plan, which combines full student debt cancellation with a free public college program financed entirely by a relatively small tax on the uber rich. In addition to funding free public college, Bernie's plan would cap student loan interest rates going forward at 1.88%. And you cannot overstate how important these interventions would be in preventing the same debt crisis from reemerging 5, 10, or 15 years after this cancellation. After all, this $10,000 of cancellation amounts to merely 1 year of interest for millions of borrowers, and it will be back on their balance sheets in no time flat if interest rates as high as 8% aren't taken care of. That's exactly why the loan servicing industry lobbied for the loan cancellation amount to be $10,000. This was literally their plan, designed to keep their profits flowing. All they want is for the moratorium to end so they can start collecting again. And they know that $10,000 is nothing in the grand scheme of the interest payments they still stand to collect. Truly free public college means anyone who takes out debt going forward truly would have no one to blame but themselves for that choice. Unlike now, where public colleges are not always available and still cost a pretty penny, it was literally cheaper for me to go to certain well-endowed private institutions than the average in-state tuition. Free public colleges also have an equalizing effect, devaluing the power of institutions like Harvard, which merely peddle prestige to elites while leaving out much of the working class. 15% of the Harvard class of 2019 were legacy students. And more than half of Harvard students come from the top 10% of the income distribution. Other countries with free higher education have less class division and more regard for those who opt for vocational educations. They're more equal places with more class mobility. This is the populist dream we should be working toward, in which we were working toward before Ronald Reagan, as governor of California, purposefully worked to make public universities and colleges inaccessible to the poor. Making poor and working class people dependent on federal loans was a way to disrupt working class populist equality movements in the 1970s. And whatever you think about those movements, it was all of our kids who suffered. Now it's the moment for everyone excited about student debt relief to join with those who raised real concerns that this is but a stopgap solution and push for more meaningful legislation to be passed that gets to the root of the problem. If you were objecting in good faith to student debt cancellation on the grounds that it didn't get at the root of the issue, you should push your congressional representatives to back Bernie Sanders' free public college bill, which was introduced in the House in 2021. The bill is fully funded by the Tax on Wall Street Speculation Act, which would levy a 0.5% tax on stock trades and a 0.1% fee on bond trades and a 0.005% fee on derivative transactions. That would raise up to $2.4 trillion over the next decade, according to a summary of the bill. This is a moment where momentum is building. The bullies who want socialism for the rich and a miserable, precarious life for the 99% are losing ground. Things have become so painfully unequal that it's difficult for even conservatives to justify. It's why we see conservative states like Florida voting for a $15 minimum wage. It's why we see conservative states like Kansas voting down ballot initiatives that would ban abortion in the state constitution. This is a moment where the people can start making the government work for us again. But it won't happen if we can't put aside petty partisan fighting, triggered by elites who want nothing more than to protect the status quo in which they thrive. And that gets me back to a point alluded to at the top of this segment. Why is it that elites are so invested in keeping us indebted? Why do they support tax breaks for homeowners and families, even though those often target the same middle-income folks targeted here and not the poor? Why are elites in both parties mad at student debt cancellation for targeting the middle class when middle class is usually considered to be the most politically deserving group? Well, the difference is that elites of both parties have a deeply vested interest in preventing mobility for working people. They push home ownership and childbirth both because they serve capital, big business, industry. None of it is about supporting a cultural or personal desire for family. It's about convincing otherwise precarious people to maintain an economic status quo. You see, once you've bought a house, once you've had kids, once you have student debt, your options to leave your job, to start a business, to move, to become free are limited. And that's why the government will tell you, or even now force you to have a child, but won't actually help you with childcare. It doesn't want you to be able to work from home. It doesn't want you to be free from the yoke of employer-based healthcare. No, it wants you in the office with less free time than anyone in the free world. Because when people have time to think, to innovate, to start businesses of their own without fear that they'll get sick and go bankrupt from medical bills, they no longer can be under corporations' control. Without the threat of student debt and medical debt, how could they even get you to join the military and fight in their unjust wars? Sound conspiratorial? Well, look at the evidence. Liberal lion Malcolm Gladwell, who has waxed poetic about how he loves to write his best-selling books from cafes, lectured normal folks to get back to work. What have you reduced your life to? He asked the commuting masses. Democrats bragged about having child poverty with the child tax credits, but despite being overwhelmingly popular, those tax credits were quickly on the chopping block. Can't have parents free up enough money that one of them can stay home or work one fewer job. The market demands a desperate labor force, not a happy one. And just this week, they admitted it. Ken Klippenstein and John Schwartz at The Intercept just broke this news yesterday. On an earnings call, real estate CEO and president of Douglas Emmett Incorporated, a real estate corporation worth over $3 billion and based in Santa Monica, California, said a recession could be good if it comes with a level of unemployment that puts employers back in the driver's seat and allows them to get all their employees back into the office. Recession could be good? Employers back in the driver's seat? That's code for be able to exploit their employees without their employees having any recourse. And that's the whole game. The reason so many elites hated the stimulus checks is not because they drove inflation. You see, they don't tie the PPP checks for billionaires to inflation in the same way, or Trump's tax cuts for the rich, which added more to the deficit for absolutely no reason than anything that's happened before or since. And they aren't talking about the supply chain crisis or the war in Ukraine, two key causes of inflation. No, they talk about spending because they don't want working people to have options. Because when working people have options, they can demand higher salaries. When workers have options, they can bargain for a bigger piece of the pie. This is why union organizing is so important. It gives workers who individually have very little power to attain the power of collective bargaining, the power to withhold their labor together and force employers to share profits more equitably. In the golden age of labor, the 1950s and the 1960s, CEOs earned about 30 times more than their employees. Want to guess what that ratio is now? Well over 300 to 1. And this is while workers are working more hours with less to show for it. COVID relief unexpectedly empowered labor, and now elites are trying to put a lid on it in whatever way they can, restarting student loan payments, canceling support for families with children, and intentionally driving up unemployment. We need to recognize this and use this student debt victory to continue to pull together as a community of working people and keep demanding more. In the richest country in the history of the world, education should be free. Yes, even for rich kids, just like public high school is free for the rich should they choose to attend. And I gotta say, I think rich people would be better people if they did attend public high schools. And just like libraries are free for the rich and services of firefighters, it's our country and we get to make it work for us. Let's follow through on legitimate concerns that student debt relief is only a partial solution and finish the job. Let's make America great again by establishing a well-educated, able workforce, one we can be proud of, one that can build semiconductors and make doctors and plumbers and invent medicines and fix our roads and bridges and create clean energy solutions, one that can compete on a global stage without relying on the power of American imperialism. I truly believe we can do all that, and I believe that free public college is a solid first step. So what do you think, Robbie? Have I addressed some of your concerns that you raised yesterday?
Look, I appreciate the point you made in the middle of your radar that and that you support changes to the system, because that's really where I'm coming from. I don't understand how this can be done with, and I listened to Biden's remarks yesterday where he talks about how he speaks eloquently about how people are mired in this debt. They're drowning. They were swindled. They were scammed. They can't get out of it. Okay, fine. But how can we do this then without fixing any of the underlying incentives that, like, shouldn't we end the scam? The scam being this subsidized student loan process that the government does. It's a government policy. The government could just end it.
Yeah.
If it's so vicious, if it's such a swindle, we should stop doing the swindle.
Yeah.
So I think if you're going to make the most powerful steel man case for doing this, I would say it should be accompanied by a change to the systems, or else we'll be right back here in a couple years.
I completely agree. Now, I don't think that you should, get rid of stopgap measures and have nothing, because the reason that plan was put into effect, even though it has these horrible downstream consequences that we're all living with now, is because the reality that no one wants to talk about, and all of the people who say go into colleges and pushing people to go to college is elitist. I mean, yes, I want to live in a world where workers can earn as much as people who go to college. I want to live in a world where we respect people who have vocational training. And I do, and I fight for the rights of those people more so than a lot of people who claim populism. But the reality is, there's, I believe, a $30,000 more year average income that's earned by people who do go to college. So I think that your ability to go should simply be driven by your desire to go. Do you want to go to college? Do you want to go to vocational school? What kind of job do you want to have?
But if everybody goes to college, it'll cancel out that advantage.
Well, yes, but I personally think there's other reasons also just to have people, regardless of what you want to do professionally, to go to college. But I'm not in a place right now on this show where I necessarily want to be getting into the kind of the philosophical reasons to go to college. But even if you only care about it from a pure training the workforce perspective, enriching America's workforce so that we can do more and compete more in the world.
So the lever I would pull, ideally, to control college costs would actually be at the state level. I view state schools are state institutions. They are government institutions. State legislatures should cap, frankly, they should drastically lower what the tuition price is. I agree with you. I wouldn't make all college free everywhere, but I would say that a state school in that state should be affordable to the people who pay taxes there. And right now, that used to be true. That's not true anywhere now.
Yeah.
And I would say it's on state legislatures to act. Universities can let some employees go. Maybe some Liz Wolfe, who we have on the show frequently, my colleague at Reason, she was tweeting about this. UVA's vice president for diversity, equity, inclusion makes $357,000 a year. UC Berkeley's vice chancellor for equity inclusion makes $325,000 a year. None of these institutions have raised educator salaries whatsoever. Professors have.
That's
doesn't
wild.
go up.
The salaries are insane.
They're insane, and these places. It's not all. It's these. I've looked at these institutions.
I think those salaries are insane because the salaries are insane, not because I'm making value judgments about what kind of jobs that people do. But I completely agree.
But if they have 100, they'll have 100 other employees, all making 100, 200K. In addition to that person, to do these roles that are non-educational roles.
There's a huge problem where adjuncts aren't being paid properly, and they're being treated like professors with the burdens of professors, but without any of the support or the tenure protections or anything like that. If we care about free speech and the ability of people to actually use these contexts, these universities, to drive public conversation in productive ways, I completely agree. Which is why I love Bernie's plan. It was all right there, and this whole time I felt a little bit hamstrung, because in the context of the Bernie campaign, all of these objections that people are making were mooted by the fact that he did have a comprehensive plan to deal with all of this. And what Biden is experiencing right now, some of the blowback, first of all, he's getting a lot of support, but some of the blowback that he is getting is because he thought he could pick and choose from these kind of plans. No, Bernie had a plan for that. Bernie had a holistic vision that really wasn't appreciated by all the technocrats that spent a lot of time bloviating on the cable news. So here is the plan. It's already been introduced in the House. Anybody who is concerned about interest rates at public institutions and more broadly, like as you just said, should embrace the fact that Bernie has a cap on interest rates, should embrace the fact that he has a funding scheme on a tax on Wall Street to make sure that public colleges are free and frankly should be, the problem is that even though they're available, they are still very, very expensive. So people should be having no debt coming out of public institutions whatsoever. I know that you're a public institution grad, and I've had many friends who went to your institution, and they did have debt graduating from the University of Michigan. So there's a solution out there, people. It's right there in front of you, and I hope that we can use this moment to capitalize on it.
Well, we're going to keep talking about this issue. I think we're having a debate on it a little bit later with some guests. Obviously, we're both fired up about it. We weren't arguing on Twitter, but I was arguing with Ryan, and Batya was arguing. So Batya agrees with me, Ryan agrees with you. Only television show there is where there's actual differences, serious differences of opinion. I will be back with more of that after this.